In the coastal village of Alvheim, where the sea's salt mingled with the smoke of the forge, a sacred relic watched over its people, the Silver Chalice. Forged in ages past and etched with runes of unknown origin, the chalice was said to carry the blessings of the gods, shielding the village from famine and misfortune. Under its silent guardianship, life flourished, and the forge, tended by the master craftsman Ulfred and his two apprentices, Arvid and Soren, became the village's heart. The apprentices, though opposites in temperament, shared a bond as unyielding as the steel they shaped, dreaming of one day inheriting the forge and their master's legacy. But dreams turned to ashes when raiders descended upon Alvheim, bringing fire, death, and despair. In the chaos, Ulfred fell, and the Silver Chalice was stolen, its light dimmed, leaving the village vulnerable to the whims of fate. With their master gone and the chalice lost, Arvid and Soren made a solemn vow to recover what had been taken. Their journey would carry them across treacherous seas, through trials that tested their friendship and their very souls. Yet, as the chalice revealed its true nature, a power as dangerous as it was divine, the bond between the two men began to fray. What began as a quest for redemption would become a reckoning of ambition, loyalty, and the price of legacy. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is our story, The Silver Chalice, a bond tested by fire. Chapter 1. The Forge's Last Ember. In the coastal village of Alvheim, where jagged cliffs cradled the sea and the wind carried the scent of salt and pine, the forge stood as a beacon of strength. Its flames never died, fed by the tireless efforts of Master Ulfred and his apprentices Arvid and Soren. The forge was not just a place of labor, it was the heart of the village, a sacred space where steel and tradition were shaped together. Master Ulfred was no ordinary craftsman. Stories whispered that his skill was touched by the gods, and his greatest creation, the Silver Chalice, was proof. A relic of shimmering metal adorned with runic engravings, the chalice sat upon a pedestal within the forge, protected like a treasure of the gods. It was said that the chalice's magic had kept Alvheim from famine and misfortune for generations. Its glow would dim when danger approached, a silent warning from the divine. Arvid often gazed at the chalice during the quiet hours of the forge, wondering what sacrifices had gone into its creation. Ulfred never spoke of it, except to warn. The chalice is a burden as much as a blessing. It will test those who rely on it. Soren, however, viewed the chalice with a different eye. To him, it was proof of their village's strength and of Ulfred's mastery, a legacy he longed to surpass. While Arvid's work was careful and deliberate, Soren's was bold and unrestrained, his ambition blazing as brightly as the forge's flames. "We'll make our mark one day," Soren often said, hammering with such force that sparks rained around him. "Together, we'll surpass even Ulfred." Arvid would smile, but remained silent, his thoughts as steady as his hands. For him, the forge wasn't about glory, it was about service, tempering steel for the good of the village, just as Ulfred had taught them. That balance of ambition and humility defined their bond. Though they often clashed, their differences complemented each other, forging a friendship as strong as iron. They dreamed of taking over the forge together, their futures as intertwined as the knotwork patterns they etched into the blades they crafted. But the flames of the forge burned too brightly to last. One autumn evening, as the sea glowed orange under the setting sun, a low, mournful horn echoed across the village. The sound sent shivers down spines and stilled the air. Soren dropped his hammer, his face tense. Raiders. Arvid's chest tightened. The chalice's glow dimmed, its warning unmistakable. Chaos erupted. The villagers scrambled for weapons, barricading doors and gathering children into the longhouse. The raiders came swiftly, their war cries mingling with the roar of the waves. Clad in dark armor and wielding axes slick with seawater, they descended upon Alvheim like a plague of shadows. Arvid and Soren fought alongside their master. The forge transformed into a desperate battlefield. Soren's fury was unmatched, each swing of his hammer landing with the force of a storm. Arvid's movements were more calculated, his strikes aimed to protect rather than destroy. Together they held the line as long as they could. But then they saw him, Ulfred, standing before the chalice, his axe in hand. The raiders surrounded him, their leader towering above the rest, his helmet adorned with runes that seemed to writhe in the firelight. "Take the chalice, and you damn yourselves," Ulfred roared, his voice filled with defiance. "It is bound to this village. Its power will consume you." The raider leader laughed, his voice deep and cruel. "Then let us see whose will is stronger, old man." Ulfred fought valiantly, his strikes honed by decades at the forge. But age had slowed him, and the raiders were relentless. With a single brutal blow, the leader felled him, his body crumpling to the ground as the chalice's glow dimmed further. "Master!" Arvid cried, rushing forward, but Soren grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "It's too late." Through the smoke and flame, they saw the raiders seize the chalice. As they retreated, the artifact's light flickered weakly, as if mourning its guardian. When the battle ended, Alvheim lay in ruins. The villagers gathered around the smoldering forge, their faces etched with grief. Ulfred was gone, the chalice stolen, and the village's hope seemed lost. Arvid knelt beside his master's body, his trembling hands clutching the hammer that Ulfred had dropped. "He gave everything to protect it," he whispered. "We can't let his sacrifice be in vain." Soren stood over him, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing. "Then we take it back. We find those raiders and we make them pay." Arvid looked up, his gaze steady despite the tears that burned his eyes. Not for revenge, for the village, for Ulfred. They clasped hands, their vow unspoken but understood. The forge that had bound them together would now fuel their quest. The chalice was more than an artifact. It was their legacy, their burden, and they would face whatever trials lay ahead to reclaim it. Chapter 2. The Tempest and the Stranger. The sea was both a path and a predator. Its waves rose and fell like the breathing of some ancient beast, and as Arvid and Soren's small longboat crested the waters, it seemed to test their resolve at every turn. The battered vessel, loaded with provisions gifted by the grieving villagers, groaned with each swell. The horizon offered no comfort, just endless grey, a sky heavy with unspoken threats. Soren worked the oars, his arms straining against the relentless push of the tide. "They can't have gotten far," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual fire. His anger simmered beneath the surface, fueled by Ulfred's death and the raiders' escape. Arvid, seated near the prow, held the medallion an elder had given them. Its silver surface was etched with intricate knotwork resembling the chalice, the patterns shifting subtly when held to the light. "This medallion is our only guide," he said, his tone measured but laced with uncertainty. "If the elder was right, it reacts to the chalice's presence. But what if we're too late?" "We're not too late," Soren snapped. "We can't be." Arvid frowned, gripping the medallion tighter. Soren's intensity had grown since their journey began, his determination veering dangerously close to obsession. Arvid knew his friend's grief was driving him, but he feared where it might lead. The first test came sooner than expected. On the second night, as they sailed through a narrowing channel between jagged cliffs, the wind began to howl. Dark clouds gathered overhead, swallowing the stars and moon. The sea churned violently, tossing their boat like a toy. "A storm!" Arvid shouted over the rising wind. "We need to find shelter." "We don't have time," Soren yelled back, his voice defiant against the gale. "The raiders didn't stop. Neither will we." "This isn't about pride, Soren," Arvid shot back. "If we lose the boat, we lose everything." The argument was swallowed by the roar of the storm. Waves crashed over the sides of the boat, soaking them to the bone. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the cliffs for a brief, blinding moment. It was then that Arvid spotted something, a faint light glimmering in the distance, low on the shoreline. "There!" he shouted, pointing toward the glow. "A cave!" Soren hesitated, then nodded, steering the boat toward the light. They fought against the current, their muscles screaming with effort, until at last they reached the shelter of the cave. The storm's fury continued outside, but inside, the air was eerily calm. As they caught their breath, Arvid noticed that the light he had seen was still present, a soft silver glow emanating from deeper within the cave. His heart quickened as he held up the medallion. Its surface gleamed in response, its patterns shifting like ripples in water. "What is this place?" Soren asked, his voice hushed. Before Arvid could answer, a figure emerged from the shadows. Cloaked and hooded, the stranger's presence was unnerving, his form seeming to blend with the darkness around him. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, carrying an otherworldly weight. "You sail in pursuit of the chalice," the stranger said, his tone both knowing and foreboding. "But its path is fraught with trials, and its power is not easily claimed." Arvid stepped forward cautiously, his hand resting on the hilt of his axe. "Who are you? How do you know of the chalice?" The stranger chuckled softly, though there was no warmth in the sound. "Names matter little. I am but a wanderer, as bound to the tides as you are. But I have seen what the chalice brings. Power, yes, but also ruin." Soren scoffed, his patience fraying. "We didn't come here for riddles. Do you know where the raiders are or not?" The stranger turned his hooded gaze toward Soren, and the air seemed to grow colder. "Your anger blinds you, young one. The chalice tests all who seek it, revealing what lies within their hearts. Beware, or it may find you unworthy." Arvid placed a steadying hand on Soren's arm, silencing his retort. "If you know something, tell us," Arvid said, his voice calm but firm. "We've already lost too much." The stranger regarded him for a moment, then reached into the folds of his cloak. He withdrew a small rune-carved stone, its surface faintly glowing with the same silver light as the medallion. "This will guide you," he said, pressing the stone into Arvid's hand. "But know this, the chalice's power is not bound by mortal hands. It chooses its keeper, and the price of claiming it is always steep." Before they could question him further, the stranger stepped back into the shadows. His form seemed to dissolve into the cave itself, leaving no trace of his presence. Soren cursed under his breath, but Arvid stared at the rune stone in his hand, its faint glow casting flickering patterns on the cave walls. "This is no ordinary relic," he said quietly. "It's tied to the chalice somehow, like the medallion." Soren's jaw tightened. "Then let's use it and keep moving. I'm not letting that chalice slip away." As the storm subsided, they pushed their boat back into the water, their resolve hardened but their hearts uneasy. The runestone pulsed faintly in Arvid's grasp, its glow pointing them toward the next leg of their journey and the perils waiting beyond the horizon. Chapter 3. The Shadows of Deceit. The runestone pulsed steadily in Arvid's hand, a silent compass guiding them toward their destination. Days passed in a blur of rowing and restless sleep, the horizon never offering respite. Arvid and Soren spoke little, their shared grief and mounting tension rendering their once easy camaraderie into strained silence. Only the sound of the waves and the occasional cry of a seabird accompanied them. Finally, the jagged outline of an island emerged through the mist. Black cliffs rose sharply from the sea, their edges jagged and unwelcoming. The runestone's light brightened as they neared, casting eerie shadows over the water. This was the place. They dragged their boat ashore beneath a natural arch carved by the tides. Beyond lay a narrow path that wound its way up to a cluster of crude wooden structures nestled between the cliffs. Smoke rose from fires within the encampment, and the distant sound of raucous laughter drifted down to them. "There," Soren said, his voice low but resolute. "The chalice is in there. I can feel it." Arvid glanced at the runestone, its light pulsing faintly now. "The raiders are too many for us to face directly," he said, his voice tinged with caution. "We'll need a plan." Before Soren could respond, a rustling sound came from the underbrush behind them. They turned, weapons drawn, to find a wiry man emerging from the shadows. His face was sharp and weathered, marked by scars and desperation. "I mean no harm," the man said quickly, raising his hands. "I overheard you. You're after the chalice, aren't you?" Arvid's eyes narrowed. "And what do you know about it?" The man glanced nervously toward the encampment. "I was one of them, a raider," he admitted, his voice trembling. "But I've had enough of their ways. That chalice, it's cursed. It's poisoned their minds. They'll kill each other over it if they haven't already." Soren's grip on his sword tightened. "Why should we trust you? You're one of them." The man held his ground, desperation flashing in his eyes. "Because I can help you. I know the camp. I know where the chalice is kept, and how to get to it without setting off the traps." Arvid and Soren exchanged a glance, their mistrust clear. "If this is a trick," Arvid began. "It's not," the man interrupted. "I want out. Let me help you and I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." After a tense moment, Arvid nodded. "Lead the way, but if you betray us, you won't live to regret it." The man, who introduced himself as Jorund, guided them along a hidden path that skirted the edge of the camp. The raiders' voices grew louder as they crept closer, a discordant mix of drunken laughter and angry shouting. At the heart of the encampment stood a crude altar, and atop it rested the Silver Chalice. Its surface pulsed with a faint silver light, its glow casting dancing shadows on the surrounding cliffs. "There it is," Jorund whispered. "The traps are set around the altar. Pressure plates, hidden blades. It's a death trap for anyone who doesn't know the way." "And you know the way?" Soren asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Jorund nodded. "Follow my lead." They moved cautiously, avoiding the sentries and navigating the maze of traps Jorund described. Arvid's heart pounded with every step, his grip on the runestone tightening. As they neared the altar, a commotion erupted on the far side of the camp. A fight had broken out among the raiders, their shouts echoing through the cliffs. "It's the chalice," Jorund whispered. "It's driving them mad." They reached the altar, the chalice gleaming tantalizingly before them. "We're here," Jorund said, a note of triumph in his voice. Arvid stepped forward cautiously, but Soren's impatience got the better of him. "Enough waiting," he said, reaching for the chalice. "Wait," Jorund hissed, but it was too late. The moment Soren's hand brushed the chalice, the traps activated. Hidden blades shot out from the ground, and a low rumble echoed through the cliffs. "You fool," Jorund cried. "You've doomed us all." The raiders, alerted by the noise, turned their attention toward the altar. Their eyes gleamed with greed and fury as they charged, weapons raised. "Defend yourselves," Soren shouted, drawing his sword. The battle was chaos. Arvid and Soren fought back to back, their movements a dance of steel and fire. The raiders came at them in waves, their attacks frenzied and uncoordinated, driven by the chalice's influence. Bjorn scrambled for cover, shouting directions as he tried to avoid the carnage. Amid the chaos, Arvid saw Jorund creeping toward the altar, his eyes fixed on the chalice. "No!" Arvid shouted, breaking away from the fight to intercept him. But he was too late. Jorund grabbed the chalice, his face alight with triumph, only for his expression to twist into terror. The chalice's glow intensified, its light searing through him. He screamed as the power consumed him, his body crumbling to ash. The raiders froze, their bloodlust replaced by fear. The chalice's light flared brighter, filling the camp with an otherworldly brilliance. One by one, the raiders fled, their greed turned to dread. When the light faded, only Arvid and Soren remained, their breaths ragged. The chalice lay on the altar, its glow dimmed but still present. Soren reached for it, but Arvid stopped him. "Don't," he said, his voice trembling. "We don't know what it will do." Soren hesitated, his face a mask of frustration and exhaustion. "We've come too far to leave it. We've come too far to let it destroy us," Arvid countered. Their gazes locked, the tension between them palpable. At last, Soren relented, stepping back. Together, they wrapped the chalice in cloth and fled the island, leaving the ruins of the camp behind. But as they sailed away, the chalice's faint glow seemed to pulse in time with their own hearts, as if marking the beginning of yet another trial. Chapter 4. The Weight of Legacy. The sea was calm as Arvid and Soren sailed back toward Alvheim, yet the silence between them was anything but. The silver chalice, wrapped in thick cloth, rested at the boat's center, its faint glow occasionally flickering through the fabric. Each flicker felt like a pulse, an unnerving reminder that their quest was far from over. Soren stared at the horizon, his hands gripping the oars tightly. "We have the chalice. That's all that matters." "No," Arvid replied softly, his voice heavy with unease. "It's not all that matters. What about what it did to Jorund, to the raiders? You saw it, Soren. That power, it's not meant for us." Soren's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he rowed harder, as if trying to outrun the doubts gnawing at his mind. When they finally reached Alvheim shore, a crowd awaited them. The villagers, weary and gaunt, gathered in silence as Arvid and Soren carried the bundled chalice up the path to the forge. Whispers rippled through the crowd, hope flickering like a fragile flame in their eyes. The village elder, her weathered face unreadable, stepped forward. "You've returned," she said, her voice steady. "And the chalice?" Arvid unwrapped it carefully, revealing its gleaming surface. The villagers gasped, their expressions shifting from awe to reverence. Yet even as the chalice's glow illuminated their faces, Arvid felt its weight grow heavier in his hands. "It's here," Arvid said, "but it's not the blessing we thought it was." Soren scowled. "The chalice is the villagers' hope, Arvid. Without it, we're defenseless. You know that. Arvid shook his head, his grip tightening on the chalice. Hope built on a curse isn't hope at all. Look what it's already done. How long before it turns us against each other, just like the raiders? The villagers murmured uneasily. The elder raised a hand, silencing them. What are you saying, Arvid? I'm saying we shouldn't keep it, Arvid replied, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. The chalice doesn't protect us, it tests us, and its price is too high. Soren stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. You're wrong. Ulfred gave his life for this. We gave everything for this. How can you say it's not worth it? Because Ulfred knew the truth, Arvid shot back, his voice rising. He warned us that the chalice was a burden. He didn't die to protect its power. He died to protect us from it. The tension between them was palpable, the crowd holding its breath. Soren's fists clenched, his frustration boiling over. You've changed, Arvid. You've let fear blind you. And you've let ambition blind you, Arvid countered, his gaze steady. This isn't about us, Soren. It's about the village, and what's right. The elder stepped between them, her voice sharp. Enough! This relic has protected our people for generations. If what you say is true, Arvid, then let the gods decide. She gestured toward the forge, its flames newly lit by the villagers. Place the chalice on the anvil. If it is meant to stay, the gods will show us. If not, they will take it. Arvid hesitated, then nodded. He carried the chalice to the forge, its surface gleaming ominously in the firelight. Placing it on the anvil, he stepped back, his heart pounding. The villagers gathered in a semicircle, their faces illuminated by the forge's glow. The elder raised her arms, chanting an old prayer to the gods of the sea and sky, asking for guidance. The chalice began to hum, a low, resonant sound that filled the air. Its glow intensified, silver light spilling across the forge. The villagers shielded their eyes as the light grew blinding, and the hum rose to a deafening crescendo. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, the chalice disintegrated. Shards of silver light scattered into the air, fading like dying embers. When the glow disappeared, all that remained on the anvil was a fine layer of ash. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the crackling of the forge. The elder lowered her hands, her expression solemn. The gods have spoken. The chalice is no more. The villagers murmured, their emotions a mixture of relief and grief. Some wept, while others embraced one another. The weight of the chalice's legacy had lifted, but its absence left a hollow ache. Later that evening, as the villagers began rebuilding their lives, Arvid and Soren stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea. The stars shimmered above, their light cool and distant. We did what we had to, Arvid said quietly. Soren didn't reply for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Arvid had ever heard it. Maybe, but it doesn't feel like victory. It's not about feeling victorious, Arvid said. It's about doing what's right. Soren sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I'm leaving, Arvid. There's nothing here for me anymore. Arvid looked at his friend, his heart heavy. He had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. Where will you go? Soren shrugged. Somewhere I can build something of my own. Maybe that's what Ulfred wanted for us, to find our own paths. Arvid nodded, his throat tight. If you ever need help. Soren smiled faintly, a flicker of the old fire in his eyes. I know where to find you. They clasped hands one last time before Soren descended the path toward the shore. Arvid remained on the cliff, the wind tugging at his hair as he watched his friend disappear into the distance. The chalice was gone, but its lessons lingered. In its absence, Alfheim would rebuild, not with the crutch of divine power, but with the strength of its people. And though their paths had diverged, Arvid and Soren would forever carry the forge's fire in their hearts. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Silver Chalice, a bond tested by fire.